Well, welcome back to the homestead. Last week's episode was pretty much a complete failure. So I was trying to do some repair work on the subfloor where the subfloor has swole up at all the seams because it got submerged in water when I first stood the walls up. And that's going to affect the way that my hardwood floor rests on it. So I have to get that sanded out. I rented a floor buffer to try and sand that out, but there's a pad that goes between the bristles of the brush, the bristles of the buffer and the sandpaper, and that pad's probably about an inch thick, and it's kind of soft. It's able to compress, and because of that, it really didn't do a very good job concentrating on the high spots. It just kind of sanded the whole surface area of the buffer. So I've gone back and I've gotten the drum sander that I originally intended to get. It's got a 8-inch wide drum on it, and it's a hard drum, so there's not really any compression in it. So when you wrap that in my case, I'm going to be using 20 grit sandpaper. When you wrap that up and you set the drum down on it, that drum is only going to contact the highest point in the floor, and it's going to sit there and sand that until it sands it down and that contact patch widens out. So once that contact patch is as wide as the drum on that sander, the damage should be sanded out of these floors and they should be nice and flat. So we're going to see if we can use that to sand over the seams and get those repaired. And once we're able to get that repaired, then we can move on with installing our hardwood floors. So let's go ahead and get this thing fired up. I'm going to put a dust mask and some hearing protection on and see if I can't get these floors back to where they need to be. Okay, so I've gone through and I've sanded all the floors downstairs, and the subfloor is nice and flat now. If I take a 4-foot level and I run it across the floor, when it goes over a seam, it doesn't sit there and rock like it was doing before. So I'm happy with the status of the subfloor now, and we're ready to start putting our tar paper and hardwood down as far as that goes. But one problem I've run into is I don't know anything about hardwood floors, so this is the first hardwood floors I've ever put down. And from what I understand, for every 1 foot of cross grain that I run, I need to have 1/16 inch of expansion and contraction. Now I've got one run, it's about 8 foot wide, where it's 32 foot across. So in that area, I would need about 1 inch of expansion and contraction on both sides. And that's kind of hard to cover up, especially if your wood doesn't go under your sheetrock. So my sheetrock is 1/2 inch thick, and you can see behind me, they've held it up off of the floor when they hung it, but it's not up 3/4 of an inch everywhere. Some places it is, some places it isn't. So what I've done, I bought a little Dremel flush cut saw, and I just took a little short piece of flooring and lashed to it. My plan is I'm going to run this along the bottoms of the wall. I've got the blade set for a 1/2 inch depth, so it'll just cut through my sheetrock, and it'll be just above where my flooring would go, so it'll give me enough room to slide the flooring under the sheetrock. And then that'll give me a 1/2 inch of expansion gap there, and then a piece of 3/4 inch baseboard, baseboard, and I'll have enough to cover another 1/2 inch right there. So if we don't go with shoe molding, then that'll cover the gap that I need. So what I'm going to do is just try and run this saw around the edges. I'll probably set it just a hair shy of a 1/2 inch because I don't want it to dull the blade on the nail plates. And every once in a while I'll have to pull a sheetrock screw or something out, but we're gonna go ahead and try that and see if we can't get the drywall moved up 3/4 of an inch or just a hair more so that the flooring will slide under it. So let's go ahead and do that. All right, well, now that I'm through running the Dremel saw all the way around the baseboard of the living room and the kitchen, we've got our drywall cut back so that we've got slightly more than a 3/4 inch gap between the subfloor and the bottom of the sheetrock. So my 3/4 inch hardwood will fit under that drywall now. So even if I run the hardwood all the way up to the drywall, I've got a 1/2 inch expansion gap all the way around the room. And in the places that I need more than that, I can cut it back a little bit more and the baseboard will cover that up. So I think we're good on expansion gaps now. And the next thing I need to do is go ahead and get the underlayment out and start getting that put down. So what I'm gonna use for underlayment is just 15-pound felt paper. That's a pretty common underlayment and it's easy to get your hands on. And I don't really know of any drawbacks to using it. So that's what we're gonna go ahead and use in this case. So let me go ahead and get those materials out and see if we can't start getting some felt paper stapled down. And then once we have that down in place, we can come back and start pulling a line for the first row of hardwood. You want to carry that one in? You got it. Go that way. Now that I've got the felt paper down on the entire floor of the living room and the kitchen, which are the first 2 rows that I'm going to put flooring in, the next thing I have to do is establish a starter row. So because I'm going to put wood flooring down in the entire first floor of the house, and I don't want seams in all the doorways, I want the wood to flow continuously through the openings. What I'm going to do is, instead of starting along a long wall in the room, I'm going to establish a beginning line out in the middle of the room where it goes from one wall of the living room all the way to the opposite wall in the kitchen. So this little opening right here is where I really want to start my flooring at. And to do that, I've gone ahead, I've got 1/2 inch sheetrock up, and I've undercut all of my sheetrock so that the flooring will go under it. So I've got a 1/2 inch expansion gap if I start at the sheetrock. I want a 3/4 inch gap. So I'm going to hold my wood out 1/4 inch from this sheetrock to start. and then that'll give me a 3/4 inch expansion gap around the room, and we should be good to go. So in order to establish my starter row, I'm going to measure from the far wall here out, and this opening is 51 1/4 inches. So I need my first row to start just a little bit past 51 1/4. So what I'm going to do is I'll take 51 1/4 inches, and I'll subtract 3/4 inches for the expansion gap. That'll give me 50 1/2 inches. Now my flooring boards are 2 1/4. So I'll divide the 50 1/2 by 2.25, and that gives me 22.4. So if I started right at the end of this opening, I would get 22.4 boards before I got to my expansion gap. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to change the 22.4, I'm going to round that up to 23. I'm going to multiply 2.25. That'll give me 51 3/4 inches plus the 3/4 inch expansion gap, and I get 52 1/2 inches. So 52 1/2 inches off of this front wall is where I want to start my first row of flooring. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the far wall in the living room, and I'll measure out the 52 1/2 inches. I'll put a finishing nail down. Then I'll go to the opposite wall in the kitchen. I'll measure out the same distance, and we'll pull a line between those. Then I'll use that string line as the straight line. I've got a couple of 1x4s that are straight, and I'll screw those to the floor on that string. And then we'll use those 1x4s as the backstop for the first row of flooring. So instead of blind nailing through the top to keep the board from moving, we're going to use that backstop. And then once I get that first row started, I'll come back and I'll do rows 2 and 3 before I pull the backstop up, so that I've got a nice wide section of flooring that's started. And then I'll just do that all the way across the room until I've got 3 rows of flooring started. Once I've got 3 rows started, then I can begin working end to end in the house and going all the way down the row until I get to the opposite walls. And once I get to the opposite walls and I finish over there, I'll come back to the starter row, and I'll put a wood spline in that groove that's on the back side of the first row. That'll allow me to turn the next row of wood so the tongue is facing the opposite direction, and then I can work out towards the first wall that we measured off of. And by doing that, anytime I go through a doorway, whichever direction the tongue is facing, I can finish from that first row that goes through the doorway to the wall that the tongue is pointed at, and then I can come back and put a spline in that groove and turn and work the opposite direction to finish out that room. So that should give us seamless openings through all our doorways. So let's go ahead and get our starting line pulled and see if we can't get a few rows of this stuff put down. Now that I've got a straight edge down on the floor to do my first row on, I'm going to go ahead and get some of the flooring out, scatter it, pick out a few pieces to start nailing against that for the first row. It seems to be going pretty good so far. I've got the first 4 rows nailed down for the length of the starter strips that I screwed to the floor. And I'm not concerned now that when I put the next row on those and I hit the nailer, that it's going to shift those boards and get me out of alignment. So what I'm going to do now is I'll pull those 2 starter boards up, and we'll just shift that on down the line until we get all the way to the outside wall there in the kitchen. Once we get to that wall and I've got all 4 rows done, then I can start working each row all the way from end to end and finish this part of the room out. So let's go ahead and get those starter boards shifted down and keep these first 4 rows moving. Well, I've kind of got a pretty good start on it, I think. I've came in, I've sanded all my subfloors so that the seams where they swole up are flat again. In the kitchen and living room areas, I've cut the bottom of the sheetrock so that it's up 3/4 of an inch so that my wood flooring can expand and contract under it. I've got a starting line pulled, and I've got the first 6 rows put down across these 2 rooms. I figured it up, and the 2 rooms will take approximately 100 rows. So I've got a long way to go, but the more I do it, hopefully the faster I'll get, the more of a rhythm I'll get established and all. But right now I'm pretty happy with the results. I think what I've got down looks just as good as if I'd hired a professional to come in and do it. So slow and steady is fine with me. You know, we'll get there when we get there. But at any rate, we're gonna go ahead and wrap today's video up, and in the next video I'll just be plugging along trying to get these 2 rooms finished. So till next time, y'all keep checking back.